Today I'll be discussing the practice of supervisors telling students to write chapter 1 to 3 or even chapter 1 to 3 uh, for their thesis, both MSc students and PhD students. Some supervisors do that, some don't. But my take is that doing that, from my experience, is not the best practice. It's not the best practice because in thesis research, background chapter 1 is fundamental, which is background. And chapter 1 serves as a foundation where you build the house. So, like one of my lecturers will say, background backgrounds everything. So, the best for students is that a student should be allowed or should be guided to get chapter 1 correctly. That's the background, the introduction. Because when you get chapter 1 correctly, chapter 1 is where you are clearly going to define the research focus. That is where you are clearly going to define the research objective. That is where you are clearly going to define the research questions and clearly defines the research scope. Therefore, it is important that you clearly get chapter 1 first correct before you can proceed to other chapters. And I think that your supervisor needs, or your supervisors, for the case of those who have 2-3 supervisors, they need to clearly guide you to get chapter 1 correctly before you can proceed to chapter 2 and chapter 3 and the remaining chapters. Because chapter 1 defines the research objective. And it is from the research objective that you also design or you also produce your literature review, which is chapter 2. Because your literature review must be in line with the research objectives. Therefore, if you did not get chapter 1 right, the chances that you are not going to get the chapter 2 right is very high. Again, it is your chapter 1 that where you clearly define the research objective that will guide your research methodology. So if your chapter 1 is faulty, if you were not properly guided on how to address issues in chapter 1, you are likely not going to get the chapter 3 correctly. Therefore, I think that the best practice should be that rather than your supervisor telling you go and bring chapter 1 to chapter 3. The best practice should be that he or they should guide you to get chapter 1 correctly. Because as soon as you get the chapter 1 correctly and clearly defines the research questions, research objective, research scope, then that will clearly guide you in chapter 2 and chapter 3. Because your chapter 2 and chapter 3 must be in line with the research objectives. So anything you're doing outside the research objectives is completely out of the line. Therefore, the challenge therefore is that when the time you put all your energy and stress, by the time you put all your energy and effort producing chapter 1, producing chapter 2, and producing chapter 3, unfortunately, often you because you're doing it for the first time, or because you lack the experience to do this thing, often you are not likely going to get it right. I have seen a situation where after writing chapter 1, 2, 3, some people even end up having their research topic changed. Then it demoralizes you. You begin to ask yourself, all the effort you put in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, you actually going to start afresh because you were not guided on how to do chapter 2 and chapter 3. So for you to do this thing successfully and rightly, you must get chapter 1 right. Therefore, I think that the best practice for me, my opinion, my take is that from my experience, I think that the best practice is that your advisors, your supervisors, should first guide you in clearly writing chapter 1. So when you do this chapter 1, that sets the foundation for the research. It makes it easy for you to do chapter 2, which the research objective that had been identified in chapter 1 will address or will guide you in doing chapter 2. So, and that will also guide you in doing chapter 3. So my thinking or my belief is that putting students under the stress, under the huge stress of doing chapter 1 to chapter 3, and at the end of the day, they get back to do it afresh because they didn't even get it right for the first place. It's not actually good. And I think that the best we can do is that when we supervise students at the level of MSc and PhD, we should be able to guide them properly. We should be able to say, wait a minute, go and bring your chapter 1. It is when we guide that student properly in getting the chapter 1 right that we cannot ask him proceed to chapter 2 and chapter 3. And make sure that your research objective identified in chapter 1 should guide chapter 2, chapter 3, and even going to chapter 4, chapter 5. Because everything about thesis, everything about research is to fulfill the research objective. And the research objective must guide all the processes from the beginning to the end. So you cannot begin to build a house when you did not get the foundation right. And when you build a house that has no solid foundation, that house is surely going to collapse. So chapter 1 is the solid foundation that you need to build very good research work and research thesis. So my own appeal is that when your supervisor tells you, go and bring chapter 1 to chapter 3, ask him please ask him or her, or ask the team of supervisors, thank you, but I prefer to bring one first. Because what that is going to do is that it is going to save you the energy, or it's going to save you the frustration of doing chapter 1 to chapter 3 that will be subjected to rigorous correction or outright cancellation. So when you do chapter 1, it clearly defines the path at which you're going to travel, which will now make it easier for you to clearly identify what will be in your chapter 2 literature review and what will be in chapter 3 methodology. When you do this thing, you are not likely going to be very frustrated or likely going to get frustrated in your PhD or MSc thesis. I think that I just feel that I should share this experience so that students will be able to talk to their supervisors, talk to them to say, look, I know it's important I do this, but please, can I do chapter 1 first to get it right so that it will serve as a compass to the road I am traveling. So I just feel I should share this with students. I just should feel we should have this conversation. I should have this conversation for students who are actually doing their thesis, because it's actually going to help them a lot more. Thank you.